And we're on the Taxation and Customs Union website of the EU. And inward processing. And we see, in this case, for EU business, inward processing means that non-union goods are imported in order to be used in the customs territory of the Union in one or more processing operations, for instance, for the purposes of manufacturing or repair. As such, inward processing allows relief from customs charges, but also allows the easing of certain import conditions for goods from foreign trading areas. We see, inward processing relief provides options to suspend customs import duty, VAT, excise charges, as well as customs import measures. Measures are taken from trade agreements, regulations and also amendments to regulations. And we looked at where UK businesses might find import and export measures in part 1 of this course, where we explore the UK trade tariff tool. Moving on. Local businesses use the inward processing procedure to seamlessly import and locally process third country goods, i.e. goods from outside their customs territory, thus providing jobs for their local economies. And processing might involve straightforward manufacturing or repair. Or processing might involve both machinery or manual handling, required to improve marketable quality and presentation of imported goods. And this, often involving packaging, preservation or other preparations for distribution or resale. After your processing is complete, you can re-export your goods. And we explore re-export in a later video. Alternatively, you can apply for union status for your goods by releasing them to free circulation. In this case, and as we previously mentioned, you will need to cough up. That is, make arrangements for payments for any duties and taxes applicable to your situation, for example, VAT, excise, etc. If you wish to release your processed goods to free circulation, we see down here that you have two options as to how your duty and taxes are calculated. You can apply to pay duty at the rate and customs value applicable to the imported goods at the time of acceptance of their related customs declaration. Or you can choose to have your duty and import VAT calculated according to the rate and customs value of the finished processed products at the time they are released for free circulation. And that's nice. We briefly touch on different types of taxes, such as VAT and excise, in later videos, but to reiterate, when applying for union status, your goods will be checked against any import measures applicable to your goods. So, be sure you have any licenses and certificates relevant for your application ready to go prior to presenting them to customs. Any preference certificates may help you reduce charges placed on your goods. And we saw, in an earlier video, that temporary storage provides you with 90 days, should you require some extra time for paperwork. As another option, you can also place your processed goods under the customs warehousing or free zone procedures. Both of these are storage procedures. I always get confused by the terms storage and temporary storage. They sound similar but they are separate and different. So be careful. And we'll look at these storage options in later vids. But it's worth noting now that the combination of inward processing and storage procedures can allow businesses to import third country parts and materials, goods, and process them, whilst allowing some flexibility as to where and when the goods will be sold. The storage procedures can allow a certain degree of control over when to place finished goods under the re-export procedure, or the free circulation procedure, or perhaps any of the other procedures. Also, inward processing, as with other customs procedures, requires authorization to use. And authorization may be obtained from competent customs authorities. Competent customs authority. What is that? The competent customs authority, or competent member state in the EU, is the one where the applicant's main accounts, for customs purposes, are held or accessible, and where at least part of the activities covered by the customs authorization or decision are carried out. At the very least, it is the authority where the applicant's main accounts, for customs purposes, are held or accessible. And it is the competent customs authority that specifies when the inward processing procedure is to be discharged. And that's nice. In a previous video, introducing CFSP, we saw that approved CFSP applicants are notified with regard to any authorized customs procedures bundled with their application. But one can apply for other customs procedures separately and for a defined period of time. More on this later. Also, interestingly, depending on your application, we see that your inward processing authorization can allow you to export any processed goods that you might have built and stored up in exchange for the equivalent value in raw materials and parts, in order to then process those materials and parts locally and under the terms of your authorized inward processing application. What are the requirements? We see, to be established in the customs territory, although customs may allow some exceptions. They also want assurance of the proper conduct of your operations. You need a guarantee that underlies any customs debt arising from your operations. You need to show you, or your associates, are indeed carrying out operations on the imported goods, materials and parts. Business had adopted inward processing to such an extent that it has become significant in the breakdown of the balance of payments in the EU. For example, out of 160 billion euros worth of EU motor vehicles exports in 2011, almost 43%, 69 billion euros, were exports of motor vehicles that were produced under the inward processing regime, i.e., they were essentially cars assembled in Europe, from parts and components imported from the rest of the world. What about inward processing in the UK? Prior to Brexit, I assume that the UK and EU application of inward processing was identical. But as the UK has left the EU, let's look at a few conditions that HMRC sets on the use of inward processing, IP. Jumping to guidance. Inward processing. Find out how to get duty relief when importing goods for processing and subsequent re-export. You can use inward processing, IP, to get relief from customs duty and import VAT on goods that are imported from outside the EU and that are to be processed and then exported outside the EU or released for free circulation in the EU. And excise duty is also suspended when goods are entered into IP. Okay. Sounds familiar so far. And the UK has left the EU, and we see. If your business is based in an EU country, you can use IP in the UK, subject to authorization by HMRC. Non-EU bodies can only use IP for non-commercial imports. I'm guessing this means non-EU bodies must re-export their goods as part of their approved IP and discharge conditions. This is followed by notes on the calculation of duties if you want to release IP goods to free circulation. So, in all other cases, you will have to pay duties if your processed third country goods are then released into free circulation. The duties you will pay can be based on the value of the goods at import or the value of the final product. That sounds familiar too. But next, some conditions. Conditions apply to using IP. You cannot issue any documents showing the status of the goods as T2 or free circulation. You cannot issue preference certificates for your products unless specifically allowed under preference rules. We have covered free circulation. But what is T2? And what are preference certificates and preference rules? Okay. As an aside, we'll come across T2 goods in later videos when we look at transit procedures. But essentially, T2. These are union goods set for transportation from point A to B inside the EU customs territory. And the journey might also cross EFTA countries, Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, or via Turkey, North Macedonia or Serbia. T2 union goods are exempt from duty at all the customs stations en route to the final destination. If there are any VAT or excise payments to be made, usually these are made to the last customs authority at the end of the line where the goods are consumed. And that's nice. So, as far as T2 and free circulation is concerned, these apply to union goods. So I guess free circulation and T2 no longer apply to imports into the UK. And with regard to exports from the UK, applications for T2 or free circulation must be submitted to customs authorities of the European Union, not to HMRC. On top of this, all imports from outside of UK territories are in effect third country imports. This includes goods made in the EU. And so the charges and measures set in the UK tariff may apply, unless otherwise specified by equivalence rules. Equivalence touches on different special procedures. And we'll see more on equivalence in a short while. But you can access info on preference certificates from here. Preference certificates can be used to reduce duty on overseas goods. Often, these are used to reduce duty when releasing goods to free circulation in the EU. HMRC cannot allow overseas goods into free circulation, as the UK is no longer part of the EU. However, there may be other types of certificates that HMRC can accept. Find out more on this and other uses of preference certificates, perhaps for your exports as well. And get access to preference rules and info on your EUR1 certificate, as well as issues related to proofs of origin and more. All from here. And onwards. Bill of discharge. Proforma, note, verifiable, sent within 30 days of the end of your agreed inward processing period. Customs declarations. IP can also be invoked in an ordinary customs declaration. But you should only use this method if you intend to import 3 times or less in a calendar year. You can get help with authorization by declaration. We'll see the link to that shortly. Otherwise, apply for full authorization if you're a more regular user of IP. Applications must be received 1 month before importing. Using Form SP3. Multi-state authorizations. Touching on multi-state authorizations in a later video. Skipping forward. Retrospective authorization. Use this. If you made a mistake and realize your free circulation application should actually have been an inward processing application. Followed by responsibility of authorization holders. It is IP authorization holders that owe customs debt to HMRC, not the actual owners of the goods. As such, IP holders have to get any customs payments back from goods owners via private arrangements. Conditions and requirements. I'll cherry-pick points from here. Throughput period for inward processing. This is the length of time needed to process your goods. If you are using IP via a customs declaration, this period, by default, cannot exceed 6 months. If you need more time, contact the National Import Relief Unit, NIRU, at the time you submit your declaration. Contacts following shortly. Otherwise, if you are using the full authorization version of IP, the maximum duration is 12 months. In both cases, the period starts from the date you receive your overseas raw materials and parts, and ends, we see here, at the date you dispose of them. Processed products. Interesting. Not only do you need to identify the main products of manufacture in your inward processing application, you also have to identify all the secondary byproducts too. Any secondary byproducts should not be treated as production losses, waste or scrap. Waste is defined as only main goods arising from inward processing relief that are destroyed under customs supervision. We see secondary byproducts should not be treated as production losses, waste or scrap. Only goods resulting from destruction of IP or suspension goods under customs supervision are treated as waste. Very green. Also, rate of yield. Rate of yield is a measure of how many IP imports you need to produce your processed products. You need to specify this in your application. If your application covers more than one processing operation, you will have to give the rate of yield for each one separately. As an aside, it strikes me, there's a link to free circulation here. What link? Well, it might be possible that with only 1 or 2 imports, you might base your duty at free circulation on value at import. If you have many imports, then you might be better off basing your duty on value of finished goods instead. Of course, crunch the numbers to be sure. Enough rambling. Okay, onwards. Also, we see there is an economic test for specific goods. To get IP authorization on these goods, you will need to provide evidence to show why you cannot use EU-produced goods instead. Very interesting. And a link here to access the full list of goods. Annex 71-02 of the Commission Delegated Regulation 2015/2446. A long, dense document, it's true. And record keeping. Keep records for 4 years. We see they must show the nature and quantity of the goods, when and where the goods entered into IP, where the goods have been held, when and where the goods were exported or disposed of, what processing was carried out on the goods and where it took place, how the IP goods can be identified in the processed products, and production data showing your rate of yield. Additional rules for specific goods. Listing special cases you need to be aware of. Our old friend. Goods subject to preference import licensing. Preference cannot be claimed when goods are entered into IP, only if they're released to free circulation. Ozone-depleting goods. We'll see contacts for that shortly. And firearms, ammunition and nuclear materials. Contact the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills for licenses prior to your application of IP. Equivalence. The equivalence procedure lets you use identical free circulation goods instead of IP goods for processing and re-export. You can hold both IP and free circulation goods in common stock without having to distinguish which specific goods have been entered into IP. Very interesting. I wonder if this is somehow connected to the economic test we saw earlier. Anyway, onwards. Some points to bear in mind when using equivalence. If anti-dumping, then no equivalence. Common stock needs to be proved as identical. Your customers must not differentiate between your processed goods. Authorization for equivalence is needed prior to your declaration. If you've applied for IP on the basis that identical products are unavailable in the EU, you cannot then use equivalence in EU-produced goods. We also see 2 changes to equivalence procedures. Prior export equivalence and prior import equivalence. Prior export equivalence lets you export products made from the processing of equivalent free circulation goods before you import your IP goods. And prior import equivalence lets you release import goods to free circulation without the need for duty to be paid, but on the basis that equivalent goods will be exported later. And there are other IP procedures. IP for goods in customs warehouses. IP for aircraft construction and repair. IP and tax-free shopping. Lastly, how to get help. A link to imports and exports, general enquiries helpline. We've seen this page in previous videos. Also, contact the National Import Reliefs Unit, NIRU, or NIRU, for help with authorization by declaration. Okay, great. Next. Specific use.